Welcome to the Wayne Bennett Podcast, celebrating West Virginia's people, places, and the culture of Southern Appalachia. Now here's your host, Wayne Bennett.
Welcome to Wayne Bennett's Podcast. This is Wayne Bennett, and this is episode 91. And we'd like to give a shout out to Matt Mullens and the Bring Downs, who just released their new song, Appalachian Highway, and they do our intro song for the show. And big shout out to those guys and good luck. And we've been talking to Harold Hayden from Mullens, and got a whole lot more to talk about. We can't talk about Mullens unless we talk about Mullens basketball. Tell us a little bit about your history with Mullens basketball.
Well, being raised up there in Mullens, it was a basketball crazy town. I can remember I was 7 or 8 years old to go to the ball games, and Willie Akers and the state championship team. The year before that, 54, you had Vernon Hurt and his group. You had Terry Penn. All of those guys were Division I players. The 55 state championship team, at halftime, the score was 53 Mullens, 19 Huntington, and that was in the state AAA finals.
Wow.
They had Tab Scott went to William and Mary, Willie Akers went to WVU, and they just had so many Division I players over about a 3 or 4 year period. Of course, 56 is when that's when he went to WVU. But you had out of that 3 or 4 year run, you had Terry Penn that went to Virginia Tech and started 3 years. You had Akers and Tab Scott, William and Mary, Vernon Hurt, William and Mary. That might be all of them, but they were Division I basketball players. And Vernon just recently died. He was 5'7", 135-pound all-stater that left William and Mary and went in the military, and then he come back and played at Beckley College one year, and I think he might have led conference in scoring. He was the one that drove up in the bleachers by Wengler.
I remember that.
Yeah, Wengler drove him up in the bleachers, and oh man, those people in Mullens was all fired up. Actually, they didn't.
Wengler didn't even go back to Mullens.
He didn't go back to Mullens because they told him that we can't protect you. And I talked to Louis D'Antoni, and Louis lived about 3 or 4 houses from me, and I was sitting on his porch, and he was about 95 years old, and I asked him about that. And his face turned red, and that's the only time I've ever seen him upset. And he said, Wengler was a thug. He said, he told me, he said, he would do stuff and the Beckley paper wouldn't even write anything about it. He was just wild, and he just did things. And Louis told me that Mullens was up on him about 6 points. And they was playing in Beckley. Mullens had a 6-point lead on him. And Wengler wasn't even guarding Vernon. Wengler left his man. Vernon was standing dribbling. There's about 15 seconds to go in the game. Wengler left his man and body blocked Vernon and drove him up in the bleachers. Vernon weighed 135 pounds. Wengler was a man, and that's what caused all of that. But they won the state championship that year. The year after that, Jerry West, they run into a man by the name of Jerry West, and he scored 44 against Mullens that night and beat him. And that year, Willie was state player of the year over Jerry West. And then you come on up through the 60s, and of course you had Mike D'Antoni, one of the greatest ever to play in Southern West Virginia. And then
he's the first person I ever seen dribble between his legs in a ball game. I never saw anybody do that.
And he he didn't do it very often because his dad didn't like for him to show off. But when he come down court, and they should have won the state championship that year, he got upset in Pineville. But when he come down to court, he'd throw that ball behind his back and hit you right in the numbers for a layup, they were ranked number one in the state, and he was just a really good kid and a ball player. And then 2 years after that, you had Jerome Anderson. He was a heck of a ball player, went to WVU. They won a state championship. And then after that, you had Greg White. Greg didn't win those state championships, but he was player of the year. And
I think one of the most remarkable seasons was the year Mullens had a losing record and won the state championship. I can't remember what year that was.
That would have been 1970, and they had Ronnie and Donnie Bolin on that team, I think, and you had Mark Sandy that played guard at Concord, and we played Norfolk, and Norfolk was averaging 100 points a game, but you couldn't get the ball up the court against them. But Mark Sandy was a really good point guard, smart, and we beat them that year. We had a 10-10 record, but we always played a AAA schedule. We played Princeton and Bluefield and Beckley, but once we got into AA schedule, everything fell in place,
Yeah.
But I think we ended up 16-10 that year, maybe. But
What year did Butch Good play?
Butch played in 56.
56. I couldn't remember. Now, they had some good football teams, too, back in the late 50s and early 60s. And there's one sour spot there. I think when they played Mount Hope, they beat Mount Hope in the regular season, I think. That would have been 60, I think.
60.
And then when they tied in the state and they declared Mount Hope the champions, and I don't know exactly what the reasoning was behind
Yeah, they didn't have a playoff system, and I think they flipped a corner or something. I always give Lonnie Warwick a hard time because Lonnie played, he always talks about being state champ, but he played Mullens 8 quarters that year and never scored. Mount Hope never scored against Mullens. But you got over here in Van Meter Stadium, and it was muddy, and the score was 0-0. And they won state championship in 41 with a bunch of good athletes. They had a couple off that team that went to WVU and played. Then in basketball, you had what you had the 80s. You had Herbie Brooks down there, and they won 3 state championships in a row, 82, 83, 84. And then in the last year they were a school, Kenny McBride's boy Kevin played on that. No, that was Ken that played on that team. Kevin played on, both of those boys played on state championship teams.
Herbie he still got the record, I think, for scoring 50 points or so.
He got 50 points in state tournament against Parkersburg Catholic. Yeah.
When you were growing up, did you play sports like baseball, basketball, football?
I played basketball and I run track, but when I was in the 8th grade, I was considered the best 8th grade ball player in the county. And I got sick and missed 2 years of sports. I got a kidney disease. It was called, at that time, it was nephritis, but it's called Bright's disease. And I was flat on my back sometimes for 5 or 6 months at a time trying to get rid of it. They didn't have penicillin and stuff like they got now. Now they've knocked it out. But I missed a couple years. And then, of course, track was my best sport. I liked to run, and I was regional 440 champion my senior year. And there's a lot of AA schools in southern West Virginia back in those days.
See, I don't remember Mullens as much, when like they had the Beckley JC's relays and stuff. I remember Pineville, and sometimes Oceana would come up. Pineville had a Stewart kid or an Atkins. I can't remember what his name was. Atkins, and then Oceana had a Armachain boy that played football and ran a little bit of everything. But I don't remember the Mullens teams as much at that time. But Bob Gresham and that bunch would come up from Big Creek, I think, for the region or the coal fields. Usually most of the meets were up here in Beckley, which wasn't even a 440 track. It actually was like a 400 track.
Right.
It was kind of a weird thing. And people don't remember, but we ran on cinders.
Yeah.
They didn't have paved tracks at that time. But
I run at Van Meter Stadium. Mount Hope was pretty good back then too. They'd have the bells on their shoes. You could hear those bells ringing.
They passed the rules primarily for Mount Hope. They used to come up there in them railroad hats, and they wear bells on their shoes. And so there was just a few years later they passed the rules. You couldn't wear anything like that unless it was uniform, and everybody had to wear the same thing. And so it was that was a Mount Hope rule.
Yeah, my Mullens team when I was a senior, we were regional champions that year in track. We beat Mount Hope and everybody, and we won the regions that year in Concord's where we'd run.
Okay.
That's where the meet was.
Did you continue running after high school right then? I know you came back later.
I come back later when I was about 32. I started running again, and I wished, I could run a 53, 54 quarter when I was in high school, but I couldn't do it when I come back. It was like 70. I wished I had been able to have run, all the way through, because I think I could have had some really good times, when I was young. But gosh, I gained weight, and I remember the first time I went to the Pumpkin Run over at Summers County, over at Pipestem, and thought I could run a little bit, and it absolutely about killed me. At the finish line, I collapsed. I told my wife, if I die any second, don't be shocked.
Then you got into it pretty good. I mean, you were not only running and very competitively, but you were directing some races. And Mullens had a good race down there, and then down at Twin Falls, still got a great race.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite races, was the Bear Hole. And actually, some of my better races was the Bear Hole, even though it wasn't that easy of a course.
It was, when you go to Babcock, the reason those are state parks is that there can't be anything else. And you go to those races and at state parks, Pipestem, Twin Falls, you're going to run into some hills. But we put together, me and Sissy Feller and Charlie Feller, we put the Bear Hole Run together and, marked the course off. And it was a good race. I think they're on number 44 or something now. I mean, they're still going.
Yeah, I kind of like the awards. They cut out different types of wood every year and in shapes of bears, and I really look forward to getting something like that. But you got involved with our Raleigh County Roadrunners Club, and then of course everybody was kind of part of the Southern West Virginia Roadrunners Club too, but we had some characters in that Raleigh County Roadrunners. Martin Hajash was the guy that kind of kept that thing going for years, and he got it started. And we put on races. We had Thursday night runs and get-togethers, and it was a pretty cohesive group, actually. I mean,
you had Tarico and Ron Lane and Bob Red and you and me and just bunches of good people, Actually, I think we had probably 150 members at one time. We had a bunch of members.
Yeah, it was I mean, you had all levels of competition too. You had some of them, and I'm sure you had some funny stories, but we used to have an old fellow named Berman Catron. I don't know whether you remember.
I remember him well.
Berman had. Berman was a little bit older, and he would catch a ride with people if they were going to a certain race. And I gave him a ride several times. He called me up. Jim Mahalik and I were going down to the Carbide Fitness Run. And Berman called and asked me if he could go with us. And I said, sure. Well, I told Jim about it, and Jim was always kind of a jokester. So he brings this fifth of Jack Daniels bottle and filled it with tea. And he said, we're going to drink this thing on the way down, drink on it. And he said, they will tell Berman no different. And I said, well, okay. So Jim and I are in the front seat and Berman's in the back, and we're riding down the turnpike, and old Jim takes a big swig of that iced tea with the Jack Daniels bit and hands it to me, and we're passing it back and forth. And old Berman, man, his eyes got bigger. He said, y'all drinking that liquor before you run? I said, yeah, we always do that, you know. And sure enough, when we got back to Beckley, he couldn't wait to get to tell people.
Yeah.
And but Berman would, he was a little slower than everybody, and sometimes he'd get lost. And several times he would ride with us. I'd have to go find him on the course after they done give out the awards and everything. And he was a good guy. I enjoyed him.
Yeah, we had good people back then, and we all trained. We'd get together when we was going to run a marathon. Remember, we'd go to Van Meter and run to Mullens.
Yeah,
it's 23 miles, and of course the good thing was that elevation dropped. But we'd go out before we did that and put water about every 3 or 4 miles on the way, and my father-in-law run a little tavern called Kirk's, and he'd be closed on Sundays unless we were running, and he'd be waiting on us at the door to let us in so we could get something to drink. But of course, a lot of us hung out over at Jimmy's and spent a lot of time together. You know, everybody trained hard, but there was a lot of runners. I remember running a Charleston distance run, and I run it in 1:29, and there's about 2,500 runners, and I was in the top 50. But I checked here a couple years ago at the Charleston distance run, and I would have been 5th that year. You know, that's just how.
I did the same thing. I think one year I ran it, and I think I ran like 131 or 132 or something, and I was right around 50th.
Yeah.
And I think I was the 4th, actually, West Virginian, and there was about 1,300 or 1,400 runners. And I looked at comparing my time then to the ones now. And of course, now they offer a 5K and then the 15-miler, and they still don't get the number that we used to get. So yeah. I guess the running situation, at least around here, is kind of slowed down a little bit. What was your favorite race? The one race you really enjoyed more than?
I think the best organized race was the Charleston distance run, and Parkersburg had a good one. They had a 10K up there that I watched some guys run 27s at. Probably one of the worst was the Boston Marathon.
Really?
When you line up at Boston, they put you in order of what your time was, and I was running 240s, and then there was about 5,000 bandits jumped in front of everybody. It'd be 2 miles before you'd pass those people, and they'd be holding hands, and then you'd go through those college towns, and there's 2 million people on the trails, you know, in the finish line, and you didn't know whether to reach and get, they'd hold out clear stuff, or you didn't know if it was vodka or water.
Take it or not.
You had to make sure you was at a water stop. But I don't know. You know, we had so many races back in the day. The one I wished I had won was the Beckley 10K here. I come in second that day. A boy beat me. Had never beat me before, but we had a friend over in Webster County at run races, and he taught me into coming over the day before on those hills, and I got over there and had a second. But I would like to have won that race here at the Beckley. It was right, you know, finished in town, had a couple hundred runners. It was good. I remember our state championship race out here at Woodrow. I remember G setting up his beer stop instead of a water stop, and we had about a dozen prisoners from Alderson, those women, and that's where they spent their time at.
Yeah,
just a lot of fun.
We had the first state championship at 10K over here, and of Carl Hatfield came in. We had a clinic the night before, and then Jeff Adkins was running for Woodrow then, and Jeff was a top-notch runner. Ended up at Penn State and running there, and was actually
Great runner.
But the finish, of course, Carl was in his probably late 30s at that time. But the finish, he and Jeff Adkins were just sprinting right up beside each other, and I didn't know who was going to give way to what. And I think Jeff had a little bit more the speed and got him there at the end. But it was an excellent finish. And the funny thing about that race, back then we used to hand out sticks to people, you know, when they come in and had a number on them. That was their finish. And so we gave out all the awards, and everything had gone really good. The weather was good and all that. And everybody was leaving. And this guy who looked like he was in his 60s comes up and he said, "What do I do with this stick?" And it had a number 3 on it. And I said, "Where'd you get that stick?" And he said, "They gave it to me when I crossed the finish line. I don't know what to do with it." And I said, they gave him a stick if you in the order that you finish. I looked at him, and he looked like he was about 60 years old. And I said, "You didn't get that at the finish line." He said, "Well, they handed it to me." Well, his wife, who was much younger, she got all, "Well, they sure did, and he should have played. He didn't even place in his age group, and this and that." Well, we didn't change anything. Come find out, he was a professor at Virginia Tech and was ranked nationally in the nation. And I can't remember his name.
John Hosner was his name, and he held the world record or the American record for his age group. He called up a race, and he's a good friend of mine, him and his wife. He called up down North Carolina and wanted to know if that course was certified. It was a flat surface, and they said, "Yeah, it's certified." And they didn't know what he was thinking, but he went down there and set the national record for 60 or 65-year-olds. Yeah, he's John Hosner, great runner.
But then they showed up at the Thanksgiving Day run that year. Of course, I knew who he was then, and I mean, the guy ran unbelievable, but it's almost like to show me, and I hated that. I mean, after I found out, you know, what had happened, I really hated that. But he just didn't know the process.
Yeah.
He'd been a little bigger levels of running, I guess.
Virginia Tech had a lot of good runners. I'd go down in there and run. Me and Woozer sometimes would in that area, you know, and run. But they had some really good runners.
But you mentioned the name Ron Lane, Woozer. He was almost an obsessive compulsive runner. I mean, that guy, he ran miles and miles and miles, and a lot of times through injuries. I mean, he was hurt a lot. And I remember one time he came up to Jimmy's on a Thursday night. The Roadrunners were up there, and he walks in. He's on a cane. He can barely walk, and he stays there a while. And as he's going out the door, somebody said, "Well, hey, good luck in your marathon Saturday." He said, "Thank you." And he ran a marathon. And but he was kind of like that in a little bit of everything. But even before he got into running, it was trout fishing, and I mean, he was an avid fisherman. And
great guy.
Great guy. Gosh.
We trained together a lot. He put in it everything he had. I mean, everything he had. You'd think he's you'd hear him behind you somewhere. You'd think he's getting ready to die.
Yeah.
But, you know, you still got Blankenship. You still got Ronnie McKinney. Some of those guys still running. Bob Red, I think, still running. But
I saw Danny Keatley out at the Thanksgiving Day run. Bruce Blankenship, McKinney. Donna Akers usually runs in it, but she didn't run this year. But she's had over 700 and some races that she's ran in. I don't know how many it is now, but I mean, 5 years ago it was 700, and Bruce probably has about that many. Bruce is 70 years old, and he still runs quite often. So.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to believe that how the age is catching up with people, you know. Good times back in those days, the Raleigh County Roadrunners. a lot of fun. Remember David Riggs? And,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Dave. My last run, I'm not sure, but I'm not sure what my last run was. It might have been the Marine Corps Marathon. I went up there and I wasn't in real good shape. I went up there with a friend. He kept asking me to come up and run that race, and I did. It's a good race, though, well organized. Just a lot of fun back in the day when we was young.
Yeah, you mentioned Marine Corps. Now, I ran that thing about 4 times, and I loved that race. And I actually qualified for Boston in the Marine Corps one time, but I never did go to Boston. I kept saying, well, I'll do it the next year, and then never did.
Yeah.
But Larry Foster and I ran that thing, and we didn't cheat intentionally, but we sort of did. You mentioned the guys who'd get up in front of the seated runners. He and I, they were getting together, and he and I ran to the bathroom, and they're getting on the starting line, and we come out of the bathroom, and I mean they're getting ready to shoot the gun, and we run through the front of the group and trying to get to the back where we belong, and they wouldn't let us back there. So we ended up about the third row, ended up with our pictures on the Washington Post, and of course when them guys took off, I mean we were lost, yeah, for sure. But and then Larry never had ran a marathon, and he was just pushing it pretty hard, and we got to about 17 miles, and I was just wanting to stay with him, and I said, Larry, we got a heck of a pace going here. And he said, yeah, I feel great. And I said, we got about another mile. And he just stopped. And he said, you go on, I'll make it. You go ahead. Well, then I went ahead and finished, and that we had been running fast enough for me to qualify for Boston.
Yeah.
But I think the last 6 miles for him it took him almost as long as it did the first 20.
I don't care how good a runner you are. When you hit the wall there about mile number 20, and at Boston, you got the Prudential Center where it ends, the race ends, and you go up Heartbreak Hill, and you can see that building for about 6 or 7 miles, and you think you'll never get there. Larry Foster worked hard, trained hard, he's a good runner. Those were fun times, no doubt about that.
Now, the Southern West Virginia Road Running Club is still in existence. And, those were some good guys, Paul Hodges and Kevin O'Sullivan and those people, Lee Scruggs and all those guys. And they've kept it going. And it's probably the only one in the South now. But I never did train like you guys did. I enjoyed the race. I love to go race, but I didn't enjoy the training. And you got to do it.
I would run 85 or sometimes I have run 100 mile in a week. But I trained hard, and when I run against those college guys on those hills, I could just eat them alive, That was, where I could beat a lot of people on those hills. But I trained hard. I weighed 129 pounds. That's a good weight for me. That's what I weighed in high school.
Yeah.
Was 129 when I run, and your weight's got a lot to do with it. But I never had any trouble after that. Everybody said your knees will be gone and this and that, but I would still be running probably. But I had a couple blood clots in my right leg. After that happened, I got hurt in that Mullens flood down there. I went in to help pump a church out, the Presbyterian church, and I was trying to find the sump pump, and there's about 4 foot of water in it, and I found the sump hole. I fell in that hole and hit my leg and ended up with a blood clot. And I tried to run after that, but I just could never get the circulation back in that leg.
Yeah.
It just didn't work. But I love to run. Once you get in shape, your body is an amazing thing.
Oh yeah. And now you're active in the moose and stuff. You pretty good pool shooter. How did that come about?
Well, actually, coming from Mullens, if you didn't play basketball, if you did play basketball, we had a pool room down there, and we had a legend that run it, a man by the name of Bud Hypes.
I remember that.
And all the parents trusted Bud, and we'd actually go in the pool room before we was 18 years old. I started going in there when I was probably 15, 16, and I developed into a good pool player. And when you played pool down there, it was tough, and we gambled, when I was young, and we'd start on a Saturday at 9:30 in the morning and play till midnight. They closed at midnight, and we'd have some heck of a games. A lot of good pool players from Mullens. Bird Eye that lived here in Beckley, he was a Mullens pool player. Yeah.
Well, I'd heard that. I read in a magazine article. I think maybe you had on where guys from all over the country would come in to play Hypes and
Yeah.
I mean, it was just.
Bud was just a good athlete. He bowled. He was a bowler. He bowled 300 games. But playing pool, I mean, you'd stand there and Bud would run a couple hundred balls talking to everybody. It's just an amazing what a professional pool player can do. But he was considered one of the greatest hustlers of all time. He'd use a pen name out on the road. Bud beat 9 different world champions in his day. He didn't play tournaments, but he beat a world champion 9-ball player here in Beckley one time at Columbia Grill. Bud was 6'2", 190 pound, never drank, never smoked. His daddy owned the pool room. That's how he got started, was he took over the pool room when his dad died. A great guy and a great player. Yeah.
Well, your wife shoots pool too.
My wife is a real good player. We've got a house that's got a pool room in it. The last couple of years, she's been state moose tournament. She's ended up statewide in 3rd place. She's had a chance to win it, and she hadn't won it yet. But she plays real good. Yeah.
And we talked about in another interview about Mullens and the future. What do you think about the future of Mullens with the new highway and the proposal of the?
Well, if Mullens had some hotels down there, they'd have 1,000 people a weekend going in because they got good trails. They got those bars in those woods down there people don't even know about. You get back in those woods up behind Herndon, up in that area, and they got some great bars and restaurants back in there. It's 10 miles from the nearest paved road.
You got to have a 4-wheeler to get to them.
Well, you can drive to them in a car.
Okay.
You can get to them in a car, but everybody rides 4-wheelers. But Mullens is on a comeback, and I just wish we had more housing. It'll never be what it used to be. Mullens has got a chance with the road and with the trails really being a fun place for tourism. And we're getting a few coal jobs. Consol just opened up a mines down there. We're getting some mines. There's one opening up at Waco. We're getting some mines back open. So it won't be what it used to be, but it's gonna be better than what it was.
Yeah. Well, Harold, I've enjoyed talking to you, and you don't have to come back because we got more we can talk about sometime. And but sure appreciate you stopping by the house.
Yeah, it was fun. Talk about old times, and me and you've been friends a long time. It's good to see you. We don't get to see each other much, but appreciate you.
We're using this as kind of a recording of history, and hopefully somebody 50 years down the road can dig up the Wayne Bennett and Harold Hayden interview and listen to it. Anybody else that would like to be on our show, you can hit me with awbennett50@gmail.com, and we'd love to have you on here. And until next time, remember, if you're not dead yet, you're not done yet, and God bless you.